What if I told you that everything you know about FromSoftware's hardest game is completely wrong? By the end of this video, you're going to understand why thousands of Dark Souls veterans quit Sekiro forever, and why speedrunners who can beat Dark Souls blindfolded still struggle with this game years later. But here's the thing, the real reason. Sekiro is harder than any Souls game isn't what you think it is, and I'm going to prove it with data that will blow your mind. Stick around because what happens at the end will completely change how you see these games forever. Picture this. You've beaten Dark Souls 3 times. You've conquered Bloodborne. You've mastered Elden Ring. You pick up Sekiro thinking you're prepared. 20 hours later, you're stuck on a mini-boss that isn't even mandatory, questioning everything you thought you knew about these games. This isn't just your experience. This is happening to millions of players worldwide, and there's a scientific reason why that I'll reveal in just a moment. But first, let me drop a bomb on you. The PlayStation trophy data shows something absolutely insane. In Dark Souls 3, 35.9% of players defeated the final boss. In Sekiro, only 24.8% defeated Ishin. That's an 11% difference, and that number is about to become extremely important, but not for the reason you think. Keep that number in your head, because when I explain what it really means later, it's going to shock you. Now imagine you're facing Ornstein and Smaug, arguably Dark Souls' most infamous boss fight. You're struggling. You've died 15 times. What do? You summon help? Maybe you bring in Solaire. Maybe you summon 2-player phantoms. Suddenly it's 3 versus 2, and the boss that seemed impossible becomes manageable. Over 50% of players use summons for this fight. 50%. But here's where Sekiro laughs in your face. There are no summons. None. Zero. Every single boss fight, every single mini-boss, every single encounter is you, alone, with nothing but your sword and your skills. Think about what this really means, and this is where it gets crazy. In Dark Souls, when you hit a wall, you have options. You can summon friends. You can summon NPCs. You can make any boss fight a 3 versus 1 beatdown. But Sekiro strips this away entirely. You know that feeling when you're stuck on a boss and you think, maybe I'll just summon someone to help me get past this part. That thought doesn't even exist in Sekiro because the option isn't there. You must learn every single boss. You must master every single pattern. There's no calling for backup when Genichiro is destroying you for the 40th time. But wait, it gets even more insane, and this next part is going to make you rethink everything. In Dark Souls, when you're stuck, what's the classic strategy? You go farm souls. You level up your vigor from 20 to 40. You boost your strength to wield that massive weapon. You can literally become so powerful that bosses that once 2-shot you now barely scratch your health bar. I've seen players beat Dark Souls at level 200, absolutely trivializing encounters that are supposed to be challenging. But Sekiro? Oh, Sekiro has something special in store for you. Listen to this carefully, because this is where most players don't realize they're doomed from the start. In Sekiro, you can only increase your attack power by defeating bosses. That's it. There's no farming random enemies for hours to overlevel. There's no grinding souls in the same spot to boost your stats. Your attack power naturally caps at 14, and even if you spend literally hundreds of hours grinding to reach 99 attack power, the difference after 20 is barely noticeable. The game has mathematically eliminated your ability to brute force through with stats. Now here's something that's going to blow your mind, and I promise this connects to something huge I'll reveal later. In Dark Souls, parrying is this high-risk, high-reward optional mechanic. Most players never even learn it properly. They roll through the entire game, maybe block with a shield, and that's perfectly fine. You can beat every Dark Souls game without parrying a single attack. But Sekiro? Sekiro makes deflecting, its version of parrying, absolutely mandatory, not optional. Not a fun extra mechanic for skilled players. Mandatory. Let me put this in perspective with actual frame data that will make you understand why this is so brutal. In Dark Souls, a parry window is between 8 to 12 frames depending on your shield. That's already tight. But here's the kicker. In Sekiro, you get 30 frames for a deflect. Sounds easier, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because enemies in Sekiro have varied timings, delays, and mix-ups specifically designed to mess with your rhythm. Ishin alone has 7 different attack patterns with completely different deflect timings just in his first phase. 7 in one phase. And you need to memorize and execute perfectly against all of them. But here's where it gets even crazier, and this is building to something massive. In Dark Souls, you have build variety. You can be a sorcerer and delete bosses with Comet Azure. You can run a bleed build and watch boss health bars melt. You can hide behind a great shield and block literally everything. There are YouTube videos of people beating Dark Souls with magic builds where they never even get close to a boss. They stand 50 feet away and spam spells. But in Sekiro, you have one weapon, the Kusabimaru. That's it. One weapon for the entire game. Sure, you have prosthetic tools, but these are supplementary at best. They're not primary strategies. They're not going to carry you through a boss fight. There's no easy mode build. There's no overpowered strategy waiting to be discovered. Everyone who beats Sekiro beats it the same way, by mastering the core combat system. There's no cheese. There's no exploit. There's no build that makes the game easier. Now pay attention to this next part, because it reveals something about game design that most people never realize. Dark Souls lets you play defensively. You can back off, wait for openings, chip away at boss health slowly but surely. It might take you 20 minutes to beat a boss playing super safe, but it works. Sekiro? Sekiro has this thing called the posture system, and it's specifically designed to punish you for playing passively. Here's how brutal this is. If you back away from Owlfather for more than 3 seconds, his posture regenerates to 100%. All your progress gone. The game is literally forcing you to stay aggressive. But here's the catch. You also need to play perfect defense at the same time. You need to be constantly attacking, while also being ready to deflect at any moment. It's like playing offense and defense simultaneously in a sport where one mistake means starting over. And speaking of starting over, let me tell you about something that makes Dark Souls players cry when they realize it. In Dark Souls, you can have 15 or more Estus flasks. You can kindle bonfires for even more healing. You can stack up so much healing that you can make mistake after mistake and still survive. Sekiro, maximum 10 healing gourds, but realistically, you'll have 3 to 5 for most of the game. But that's not even the worst part. This is where it gets psychological, and I'm about to explain why this matters more than you think. In Sekiro, when you die, you can resurrect. Sounds like the game is easier, right? Wrong again. Using resurrection spreads something called dragon rot. The more you use it, the more NPCs get sick. Your unseen aid chance, which starts at 30%, can drop to as low as 3%. The game is literally punishing you for using its own mechanics. It's making you second guess whether you should even use the resurrection system. But now, let me tell you about the boss design, and this is where everything I've been building up to starts to come together. Ishin, the Sword Saint, is a 4-phase fight that takes 15 to 20 minutes if you're playing well. One mistake in phase 4 means starting the entire fight over. 20 minutes of perfect play ruined by one mistimed deflect. Compare that to most Dark Souls bosses, 1 to 2 phases, fights that last 2 to 5 minutes. You can tank multiple hits with proper armor and vigor. But Sekiro? One mistake can end everything. Let me tell you about Demon of Hatred, and this is where Sekiro gets really nasty. This boss is essentially a Dark Souls boss dropped into Sekiro's combat system. 3 massive health bars, attacks that punish the deflect system. It's like the developers are saying, hey, remember how you could handle this in Dark Souls? Well, too bad, you're in Sekiro now. Players who breeze through other Sekiro bosses hit Demon of Hatred and suddenly realize they can't rely on their Dark Souls instincts or their Sekiro training. It's designed to break you. And then there's Guardian Ape. Oh, Guardian Ape, you fight through this entire first phase, learning the patterns, finally defeating what seems like a challenging but fair boss. Then the second phase starts, and the game completely changes the mechanics mid-fight. The boss you just learned? Throw that knowledge away. Here's a completely different moveset with different tactics required. It's like learning to play chess, and then being told mid-game that all the pieces move differently now. Now here's something that Dark Souls players don't realize until it's too late, and this is crucial. In Dark Souls, you have defensive options. Havel's armor gives you 80% physical damage reduction. Great shields provide 100% physical block stability. You have rings for every situation, rings that boost defense, rings that increase invincibility frames, rings that regenerate health. You can literally build a character that's nearly indestructible. Sekiro? No armor changes. No shield alternatives. Prayer beads only give small HP increases. You're wearing the same outfit with the same defense from start to finish. But wait, here's where it gets even more interesting, and this connects to everything. In Dark Souls, rolling gives you invincibility frames, 13 to 16 frames at maximum. These iframes are your get-out-of-jail-free card. You can roll through any attack if you time it right. Sekiro's jump and dodge? 2 to 6 frames of invincibility. That's it. And here's the kicker. Many attacks are specifically designed to track and punish jumps and dodges. Gemichiro's jumping arrow will track your movement through the air. You literally cannot dodge it, you must deflect it. This brings me to something that breaks most players' brains, the death blow system. In Dark Souls, depleting a boss's HP means victory. Simple, clear, straightforward. In Sekiro, you need to deplete their HP or their posture, and then you need to execute a death blow. But here's the cruel part. You can win the fight, have the boss at your mercy, but if you miss the death blow timing, the boss recovers. Imagine being one button press away from victory and watching the boss get back up because you pressed it a half second too late. The true corrupted monk requires 3 full death blows. 3. You need to break her posture or deplete her health 3 separate times and successfully execute the death blow each time. One missed death blow can extend the fight by minutes. The pressure this creates is unlike anything in Dark Souls where dead means dead. Now, let me share some data that's going to put everything in perspective, and this is where that 11% difference I mentioned earlier becomes terrifying. Trophy and achievement data across all platforms shows a clear pattern. Dark Souls, 35.9% of players beat the final boss. Bloodborne, 31.9% beat the final boss. Sekiro, 24.8%. But here's what that data doesn't tell you. The people playing Sekiro are largely the same people who beat Dark Souls. These aren't newcomers, these are veterans, and they're still failing at higher rates. Want to know something even crazier? Look at no-hit runs. There are multiple documented no-hit runs of every Dark Souls game. People have beaten these games without taking a single point of damage. Sekiro? Significantly fewer no-hit runs exist, and they require frame-perfect play that pushes human reaction times to their absolute limit. The margin for error is so small that even professional players who make a living playing these games struggle to complete no-hit runs consistently. Here's something that's going to make you rethink the entire difficulty discussion. The skills that transfer from Dark Souls to Sekiro are minimal. Patience and observation? Sure, those help, but rolling, spacing, RPG mechanics, build planning, stat optimization, all of these crucial Dark Souls skills are worthless in Sekiro. Instead, you need to learn entirely new skills. Rhythm game timing becomes essential. You need to understand aggressive defense, a concept that doesn't even exist in Dark Souls. You need to memorize deflect patterns like you're learning a complex musical piece. But here's the thing that nobody talks about, and this is important. In Dark Souls, difficulty is often optional. Don't like the Capra demon? You can skip it. Struggling with a particular area? Find another path. Having trouble with optional bosses? Just don't fight them. Sekiro has mandatory skill checks throughout the game. You cannot progress without defeating certain bosses. You cannot avoid learning the combat system. Every single player must overcome the same challenges with the same tools. Let me paint you a picture of what this really means. In Dark Souls, when you encounter a boss, the question is, how will I beat this boss? Will I use magic? Will I summon help? Will I overlevel? Will I use a specific build? In Sekiro, the question is simply, can I execute perfectly? There's no strategy to discover. There's no build to optimize. There's no help coming. It's just you, your sword, and your ability to perform under pressure. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated, and here's where everything comes together. When a Dark Souls player fails, they think about what they could do differently. Different equipment, different approach, different build. When a Sekiro player fails, they know exactly what they did wrong. They mistimed a deflect. They jumped when they should have dodged. They were too aggressive or too passive. The failure is entirely on execution, not strategy, and that's psychologically brutal. Think about what this means for the average player. In Dark Souls, you always have hope that there's an easier way. Maybe you haven't found the right weapon yet. Maybe you need to level up more. Maybe there's an NPC summon you missed. This hope keeps you going. In Sekiro, you know there's no easier way. You know you need to get better. Not your character, not your equipment. You personally need to improve your skills. Now here's something that will blow your mind about the combat pacing. Dark Souls combat has a rhythm of attack, retreat, heal, repeat. It's methodical. It's chess-like. You can take your time. Sekiro's combat is like a fighting game where both players have infinite combos. The pace is relentless. You're deflecting 5, 6, 7 attacks in a row, then immediately counter-attacking, then back to deflecting. There's no downtime. There's no safe space to catch your breath. The endurance this requires is insane. A Dark Souls boss fight might be mentally taxing, but you get breaks. You back off, you heal, you reset. A Sekiro boss fight is constant mental engagement for the entire duration. Your concentration cannot slip for even a second. 15 minutes of perfect focus for Ishin. 20 minutes of constant deflecting and attacking for Demon of Hatred. Your brain gets tired in a way that Dark Souls never demands. Let me tell you about something called decision paralysis, and this is fascinating. In Dark Souls, having many options can actually make the game easier because you can always try something else. Stuck on a boss? Try magic. Still stuck? Try a different weapon. Still stuck? Summon help. In Sekiro, you have one option: get better at the core mechanics. This removes decision paralysis, but replaces it with execution anxiety. You know what you need to do. The question is whether you can do it consistently. Here's a specific example that illustrates this perfectly. In Dark Souls, if you're fighting the Nameless King and his lightning attacks are destroying you, you can equip lightning resistance gear, use a lightning resistant shield, pop a yellow bud pellet, and suddenly those attacks do half damage. In Sekiro, when Ishin pulls out his spear in Phase 2 and starts doing lightning attacks, your only option is to learn the lightning reversal timing. No resistance gear, no special shields, just pure execution. But now, I'm going to tell you the real reason Sekiro is harder. And this is what everything has been building toward. It's not just the lack of summons or the inability to overlevel. It's not just the mandatory deflecting or the lack of build variety. It's the combination of all these factors creating a perfect storm of difficulty that removes every single crutch, every single workaround, every single alternative path that Dark Souls offers. Sekiro is harder because it demands mastery, not discovery. In Dark Souls, you can discover an overpowered weapon and suddenly the game becomes easier. You can discover a cheese strategy and bypass a difficult section. You can discover that magic trivializes certain bosses. Sekiro has no discoveries that make the game easier. Every player has the same tools, faces the same challenges, and must develop the same skills. The game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, actually confirmed this in an interview that most people haven't seen. He said Sekiro was designed to be their hardest game because it forces players to engage with every mechanic rather than finding workarounds. He wanted to create a game where the only path forward was through. No around, no over, no under, just through. This philosophy extends to every aspect of the game. Even the exploration is more demanding. In Dark Souls, if you can't handle an area, you leave and come back when you're stronger. In Sekiro, if you can't handle an area, you learn to handle it or you don't progress. The game constantly tests whether you've actually learned its lessons or if you've just been getting lucky. Here's something that speedrunners have discovered that proves this point. Dark Souls speedruns rely heavily on exploits, glitches, and sequence breaks. Runners skip entire sections, use glitches to deal massive damage, and essentially break the game. Sekiro speedruns? They're mostly just players who are incredibly good at the game playing it really fast. The lack of exploits means that even speedrunners must engage with the core mechanics. Let me tell you about muscle memory, and this is crucial. Dark Souls players develop muscle memory over hundreds of hours. Roll timing becomes instinctive, spacing becomes natural. Then they boot up Sekiro, and all that muscle memory is not just useless, it's actively harmful. Trying to roll through attacks gets you killed. Trying to maintain Dark Souls spacing gets you killed. Your instincts are wrong, and retraining your brain is harder than learning from scratch. Professional players have talked about this phenomenon. They describe having to consciously suppress their Dark Souls instincts for the first dozens of hours of Sekiro. Every fiber of their being wants to roll, but they must deflect instead. It's like asking a professional tennis player to suddenly play with their non-dominant hand. The skills are there, but they're all wrong for this context. But here's the ultimate proof that Sekiro is harder. And this is what I've been building to this entire time. When players beat Dark Souls for the first time, they often immediately start New Game Plus or create a new character with a different build. The game becomes easier with knowledge and experience. When players beat Sekiro, many never touch it again. Not because they didn't enjoy it, but because they know that beating it once required everything they had. The replay value difference is telling. Dark Souls has infinite replay value because you can always try a different approach. Sekiro's replay value comes only from perfecting what you already know. It's the difference between exploring a vast open world and perfecting a speedrun route. Both are valid, but one demands much more precision and consistency. Now think about what this means for gaming as a whole. Sekiro proves that difficulty doesn't need to come from cheap deaths or unfair mechanics. It comes from demanding mastery of fair but unforgiving systems. Every death in Sekiro is your fault. Every failure is a lesson. Every victory is earned through skill, not luck or grinding. The game respects players enough to demand their absolute best. It doesn't offer easy outs because it believes players are capable of rising to the challenge. This philosophy is both inspiring and terrifying. It's why Sekiro has created some of the most satisfying victories in gaming history, but also why it has the highest quit rate of any FromSoftware game. Remember that 11% difference in completion rates I mentioned at the beginning? Now you understand what it really means. It's not just that fewer people beat Sekiro. It's that these are experienced players, Souls veterans, people who have already proven they can handle difficult games, and Sekiro still defeats more of them than any other FromSoftware title. The beauty of Sekiro's difficulty is that it's pure. There's no arguing about whether someone had an easier time because they used summons or magic or overleveled. Everyone who beats Ishin did it the same way, by deflecting his attacks and striking when possible. It's the most level playing field FromSoftware has ever created, and that's exactly what makes it so brutal. So when people ask why Sekiro is harder than Dark Souls, the answer isn't just one thing, it's everything. It's the systematic removal of every safety net, every alternative strategy, every possible way to make the game easier except for one: getting better. It's a game that demands you meet it on its terms with no compromises, no shortcuts, and no mercy. And that's why, even years after its release, Sekiro remains the ultimate test of gaming skill. Not because it's unfair, but because it's completely fair. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires you to become the player it demands. Every person who has ever beaten Sekiro has proven something that no other game can prove. They mastered a system that offers no alternatives to mastery itself. The next time someone tells you Dark Souls is harder than Sekiro, remember this. Dark Souls is a game that can be beaten in countless ways. Sekiro is a game that can only be beaten in one way, perfectly. And that's what makes it the hardest game FromSoftware has ever made and possibly will ever make. The question isn't whether you can find a way to beat Sekiro. The question is whether you can become the player Sekiro requires you to be. And for 75% of players, the answer is no.